Welcome back. Welcome back to this terrific Tuesday edition of Liquid Lunch on Newsmax TV. I'm John Tobacco. Coming today live as we do every day, noon to 2 Eastern, from the Question and Tequila Studios, downtown Manhattan. We're still on Broadway. Right down the street, the Dow is experiencing some moderate gains, up about 25 points. Bitcoin down just about the same, so nothing crazy going on there. But there are certainly some crazy things going on. The progressive zealous left, and we have a prosecutor in California now who's deciding, I'm just not going to prosecute some crimes. And Boudin said this. Okay.
And when I'm district attorney, I can guarantee you that we're going to reduce the number of jury trials and misdemeanor jury trials by at least a third within my first 6 months. And we're going to do it by making sure that the drunk driving cases that currently represent more than half of the misdemeanor DUIs, first offense, no victim, do not go to trial.
It's getting crazy out there with the left. They don't want to prosecute people anymore. They want to release illegal aliens from jail before ICE gets there to deport them. But us Americans are getting thrown into jail just about every day. To break it all down for you, Rafael Manguel, he's a fellow and deputy director of legal policy at the Manhattan Institute. Rafael, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Always great to have you down here.
Always great to be here.
What's happening? We had a scare here in New York where we almost got a DA over there in the Bronx who was going to not prosecute crimes.
Queens.
Queens.
Yes, Tiffany Kaman, yeah.
And now we see this maniac over here saying he's going to reduce the amount of trials, basically.
Well, look, I mean, you know, whether he's a maniac or not, I'll leave that to other people.
That's my own,
but no,
you know, I don't like the maniacal behavior of these progressive prosecutors who don't want to enforce justice.
Yeah, I mean, look, Chesa Boudin is part of a very large movement across the country, right? Progressive prosecutors, really progressive public defenders have sought out prosecutorial offices in order to try and affect the sort of change that they want to affect. And they're doing that by basically taking crimes off the table, right? So they're taking office, and they figured, you know, we've tried for so many years to affect change through the public policy machine, right? Getting laws passed, getting people elected, and they've had a hard time with that. And so what they've done is they've figured out, well, if we just go ahead and win prosecutorial offices around the country, we can actually reduce the number of charges and effectively, you know, declaw a lot of the laws that we don't like. So it's a very anti-democratic thing, and it's really pushed by this underlying narrative, right? That the criminal justice system is racist, it's overly oppressive, it's overly draconian. We have a mass incarceration problem, we're told, you know, time and again by people like Boudin. You know, and what's really interesting too is that he has put himself out there as kind of a victim of incarceration culture, right? He talked about having to go visit his parents in prison as if they had been victimized.
Well, let's remind folks who his parents were. Lest anyone be unfamiliar with Mr. Boudin, when he was 14 months old, and look, I don't hold anybody responsible for their crimes of their parents, thank goodness, but when he was 14 months old, he was dropped off at a babysitter when his parents, David Gilbert and Kathy Boudin, members of the domestic terrorist group, the Weather Underground, dropped him off at a babysitter and helped pull off the heinous heist in Nanuet in Rockland County, where 2 police officers were killed. So his father is in prison, thankfully, in upstate New York. So you could almost understand why this guy doesn't want to prosecute any crimes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's odd to me the tone with which he speaks about his parents' experience and his experience visiting his parents in prison. It's almost as if he believes that they were victimized by the criminal justice system. You know, never once does he mention...
Sounds like those 2 officers were victimized by his parents.
2 officers and a security guard as well. There were 3 people.
3 people got murdered.
That's right.
At the hands of these folks and their co-conspirators.
That's right.
And this guy's worried about that they were unfairly prosecuted?
That's right. I mean, the real victims of that day were Edward O'Grady, Waverly Brown, and Peter Page. Those were the 3 people who lost their lives pursuant to his parents' actions. And, you know, his parents are actually, you know, representative of a big swath of the prison population, and that doesn't really make it into the popular debate, right? The debate about mass incarceration pretends as if the people who are behind bars are mostly nonviolent, low-level offenders. The reality is that the vast majority of them are convicted of very serious crimes or pled down from very serious crimes. And so we're actually getting a serious payoff through our incarceration of certain individuals, and we ought to be aware of that in the debate. And I don't think we ought to be applauding the anti-democratic
Let me ask you this.
pursuit.
You know, what seems like the overall macro of this thing is that, you know, minorities are unfairly targeted, unfairly incarcerated. I know
right.
there was, Trump did a great thing, I thought, with the First Step Act. I know you thought there were people that shouldn't have got let out under that, but it is a step in the right direction for the people who had these minor nonviolent crimes and they're doing long terms because of Joe Biden.
Right.
But do you think he would be prosecuting a drunk driving case against a white person? Is it selective drunk driving
It's hard
prosecutions?
to say. I mean, he has been very open about his goal of ending the racial disparities in the criminal justice system in San Francisco, right? I mean, he has lamented on the campaign trail time and again that blacks are about 5% of San Francisco's population, but close to half the jail population. What he ignores, of course, are the disparities in the racial disparities in offending and victimization.
Raphael, whether it's Mr. Krasner in Philadelphia, Mr. Gonzalez in Brooklyn, or now Mr. Boudin in San Francisco, let's say people are watching this and they say, you know what, I do think there are too many people of color being locked up, and I think there are too many people in prison in general. Why is the DA's office the wrong place for that policy argument to play out?
Well, it's the wrong vehicle because it's anti-democratic in nature, right? Our democratic system, our Republican system, is built on achieving change through the political process, right? You ought to have a public debate, you ought to convince people why they're wrong, why you're right, and you make policy pursuant to those things. If you can just sidestep the hurdles of actual reform through the political process, then we've kind of turned the system on its head, and that's not something I think we should be normalizing.
So basically, you're getting these prosecutors elected around the country that are saying, we don't care what the law says, we're not going to enforce it.
Well, in some instances, that's exactly right. I mean, Rachel Rollins in Boston listed out, I think, 20-something offenses that she was going to refuse to prosecute.
Yeah.
You've got Crusoe in Dallas, who's done the same. Larry Krasner, as you mentioned, in Philadelphia. Kim Fox in Chicago, and Ed Gonzalez in Brooklyn. Eric Gonzalez.
It seems like it's a good day to be a California public urinator.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
They're creeping on us.
That's
you
right.
know, they're creeping on us. It's creeping in little by little, and you know, it's one thing to try to get the minority population down, but I hope they're not trying to also get the Caucasian population up.
Yeah,
so
it's hard to see how he'll pursue these things and
right.
what barriers he'll run into. But I do think it's something worth watching, and it's something we ought to be concerned about, not just in California, but around the country.
Raphael Manguel, Deputy Director of Legal Policy from the Manhattan Institute, always breaking it down, knows where the rubber meets the road on legal stuff. You'll see him again. You'll see me, Frank, and Nate Bradley, the CEO of Data Donate Technologies, coming up after this. And if you're wondering, a Florida judge has just ruled that your DNA is not private data. More on that with our tech specialist on Tech Tuesday, Nate Bradley, coming up after this.